It was our first home that we bought together and was a dream come true.
It had everything that he wanted, really. Just a very quiet, serene area.
You can start a new life in a new home. But some things you can't control.
Why would a grown man do something like that?
Your home wasn't your safe haven anymore.
Sometimes, the person you think could become a great friend turns out to be your worst enemy.
This was really a game of cat and mouse.
This was a powder keg ready to go off.
I'd heard the most blood-curdling scream that I'll never forget.
Los Angeles is an urban jungle that can drive you crazy. To get away from it, people move to a place like this, Calypso Lane. A tidy suburban street in Canyon Country, in the mountains northwest of the city.
It's very quiet, lots of trees. It's a very tight neighborhood. They pride themselves on, living in peace and quiet.
It's beautiful, just your all-American city where people kind of know each other. It's got that small town feel.
Tony and Cindy Davis move onto our street looking for a fresh start. They come with their daughter Jamie, son Jesse, and 2 dogs.
Tony and I were very happy. Our first home that we bought together and was a dream come true.
I was happy for them. They'd been looking for a new house for years. Jesse and I were really happy it had a pool. My parents were high school sweethearts. They've known each other since they were 14 and 15 years old. My mom came from a broken home, and my father was her knight in shining armor.
They've been together through good times and bad, including an accident that nearly killed Tony.
Tony was at work, and a forklift ran over his leg, which caused a crush injury.
12 surgeries later, and against all odds, he walked on his own again.
Things happen in life, and you have 2 choices. You can let it drop you to your knees and not go on, or you can get back up and march forward.
But Tony can no longer tackle the manual jobs he's been doing his whole life.
Tony was a very hardworking man. He was a roofer, a truck driver.
He, had given it some thought, and he was going to go back to school. So he started his journey in becoming a teacher.
Money is tight. The house is a big gamble, but they roll the dice and hope for the best.
Living there meant just a sense of pride, that it was yours.
Okay, downstairs. And this
The Davises move in next door to the Tracys, also new to the neighborhood.
The Tracys were a decent couple. Paul Tracy would immediately become your friend, and he was lovable, but he had this gruff exterior, which you could tell that inside there was this really amiable, charming person.
Hi, how are you?
Paul Tracy used to work as a commercial artist, but just like Tony, he suffered a workplace knee injury that ended his career.
And according to Tracy, the company let him go or fired him before he was able to take advantage of the medical compensation that they offered.
I like it. 2.
Physical damage, sidelined careers, a new neighborhood. Paul and Tony have so much in common.
It was a new beginning for both families. The 2 men could have been mirror images of each other.
But sometimes, similarity breeds contempt. And in this case, contempt can kill.
Get a cop here, immediately!
At first, everyone's busy doing their own thing. Tony launches into renovation projects, eager to turn his new house into the home he and Cindy have always wanted.
He did some work to the roof, new windows, new driveway, a little bit here and there.
Neighbor Nicole Wright says at first, the Tracys and Davises got along just fine.
At one time, they had a good relationship with the Tracys, they said.
I bake amazing cookies.
The Tracy and the Davis family, they kept to themselves, you know, worked hard, came home and relaxed, but they were cordial with each other.
Unfortunately, the Davises haven't been here more than a couple of months when they start to have issues with Paul Tracy's yard.
He had a big old race car tire. It was bigger than a normal tire, and it would lean up against the fence, what kind of made it just tilt a little bit.
Well, see if he'll move it.
Tony decides to take a diplomatic approach.
Tony had tried knocking on the Tracy's door, and there was no answer. And he wrote a note, you know, asking, could you please not lean the tire up against the fence? Your neighbor, Tony Davis. And that was that.
But when Tony comes home that evening, nothing has changed.
No, the tire wasn't removed. It stayed there.
That was pretty much the first time where I kind of got a sense of like maybe things weren't as serene as I had thought initially.
If they had just started talking and, more importantly, listening to each other, I don't think any of this would have happened.
Then, another annoying incident.
Take a look at this.
Cindy and Tony get a citation from the city. Someone has made a complaint about their trash cans.
Never seen anything like this, so.
Me neither.
My trash barrels could be seen from public view, and you can drive around any street in Canyon Country, and you're gonna see somebody's trash barrels up against the side of their house.
Soon, there are other strange occurrences. In the middle of the night, Tony's son, Jesse, hears someone moving in the garage. The intruder runs away before Jesse can get a good look.
Jesse heard something, and he had gotten up, and he had looked, and he came in and woke me and Tony up.
They inspect the area. Whatever the prowler was doing, nothing has been disturbed.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Surely their neighbors aren't behind these incidents.
He had heard somebody jump our side gate, and all you heard was the Tracy's door close. Once again, it's just odd.
All right, let's just go to bed.
Tony and Cindy go back to bed, feeling uneasy. Suspicion and bad blood begin to grow. No one has any idea that this is just round one of a much bigger battle.
We were just like, okay, that's really weird. Why is this man doing that?
I want this fixed.
You would get upset, and then you'd get angrier.
Well, take it easy, man. I'm really getting tired of this guy, okay?
For most people, really, when they're looking for a home, they want some peace and quiet, and that's what Calypso Lane offered. I think everyone would find it strange to hear that, you know, anything terrible were to have happened on their block.
In the first year at their new house, the Davis family settles in, enjoying the comforts of home ownership.
My dad was a really big barbecue guy, so we would, you know, barbecue and swim and enjoy each other's time together.
But peace of mind is hard to come by.
Can't believe this.
The city keeps sending citations. There's a notice about an air conditioner tarp and another about the location of Tony's new shed. No one knows who is making these complaints. It's as if someone is trying to bait our neighbors.
I was just outside working with the plants. I had set my keys in the vents. When I was finished, I went to grab my keys, and my keys were gone. There's nobody around, but it's gone. It's like a phantom or something, you know? It's just like, I don't know. I woke up in the morning.
You sure you closed it last night?
My door to my car was unlocked, and it had been gone through. There's no windows broken, but, you know, everything was tossed around.
Then, the municipal citations get more serious.
On our gate was a tag from the animal control.
This time, it's clear who the complaint is
Not
from.
an idea, but
Paul Tracy claims one of the Davises' dogs trespassed on his property and tried to bite his friend's son. Cindy categorically denies this.
That's absolutely not true. My shepherds weren't out.
But the notices from animal control keep coming.
I think we went down there to the animal control center a total of 3 times, and the 3rd time, the man behind the desk goes, "Who are these people?" Meaning the Tracys.
Tony has had it with a whole series of events. He decides it's time for a talk, man to man.
My dad is the type of man to where he would investigate and try to find out why he was doing what he was doing before he said anything, before he did anything.
I think in Tony's mind, the situation was a lot lighter than I think, than what it really was, you know. He thought they were gonna bury the hatchet.
But burying the hatchet isn't what Paul has in mind.
They weren't approachable people. When you knock on their door, there's no answer. So how do you talk to somebody that's won't talk to you?
Despite the silent standoff, life goes on. Tony completes his degree in liberal studies, a real accomplishment for a busy father in his mid-40s. To celebrate, Cindy throws a small party.
There was a couple of his colleagues there, a little bit of family, and we're out there barbecuing. The next thing you know, he's over there with his blower. It was very intentional that it was coming over the fence. It doesn't make no sense. It's just somebody trying to harass you and agitate you and annoy you.
Tony Davis's celebration is ruined.
Paul, knock it off!
And he's not going to forget or forgive.
It seemed like this man next door was just trying to sabotage my parents' dream.
What could be causing Paul's offensive behavior? Might it have something to do with his injury?
One of the biggest problems was the fact that he couldn't work. I mean, here was a guy that he really wanted to work. He wasn't an artist, and he just couldn't do that anymore. In fact, he couldn't do anything anymore. He was in pain, perpetual pain, because he suffered this calamity, this knee injury, which became worse. He didn't get the treatment, didn't get the compensation, and at that point, he started becoming resentful.
What I want to show you today is a $300,000 waste of your money.
Paul Tracy isn't just angry at the Davises. He's angry at the world.
He started to document this video, which is actually a travelogue of him driving through the streets, basically filming outside the car window, saying, look at this, look at how this is falling apart.
What a beautiful city Santa Clarita is. Got sidewalks busted up. I want this fixed immediately.
He was on a course where he would get upset.
Dirty, filthy, nasty neighborhood.
Then he would get angry, and then he'd get angrier.
I know you guys are idiots.
And then he'd get angrier.
But we pay you to do this.
The relationship with the Tracys had diminished because Paul's behavior escalated and got more and more strange.
I'll come back to visit all the time.
You know, he would do weird things like, for example, my father and I were in the front lawn and he just started coming out and snapping pictures of us. We weren't doing anything. We were minding our own business. We were just like, okay, that's really weird. Why is this man doing that?
Look, I'm really getting tired of this guy, okay?
Tony and Cindy feel like they're being stalked.
We filed a restraining order against the Tracys due to the fact that, you know, you'd walk out your front door and there'd be pictures being taken of you. It made you feel watched.
The Tracys, meanwhile, have their own version of the story. Paul and Sandy say it's Tony Davis who's always taking pictures.
What are you doing? Whoa. What are you doing?
It was just all this minutia of interaction between living next to each other. It's hard to distinguish actually who said what, because each one was to blame for some minutia that motivated the other into responding.
He's dangerous.
The Tracys file their own restraining order.
Make sure you're right, dangerous.
Now both families are forbidden from coming within 15 feet of each other.
What are you doing? He's just like,
I mean, it would basically say the same thing as what me and Tony had just wrote, except mine and Tony's restraining order would say Paul and Sandra Tracy, and theirs would say Tony and Cindy Davis. Just, yeah.
Tony takes steps to make the separation even more complete.
The Davises built a fence separating the front part of the yard. The fence that separated the backyards was there from the beginning.
Prior to us extending the fence, you could walk out and see directly into their front yard or our yard. And with the fence there, it made it just that more private.
Tony had become very frustrated and definitely decided to draw a line in the sand.
It was supposed to do the trick and keep these two from squealing and tattling and arguing with each other, but it didn't.
Instead, it just adds more fuel to the fire. One day, Tony comes home to find Paul working on what has to be the ugliest fence any of us has ever seen.
Mr. Tracy constructed an L-shaped fence on the front part of his yard. It was very strange. It was an eyesore, and it seemed to have no purpose or meaning. Mr. Tracy also installed surveillance cameras.
Paul Tracy's fence sets a chain of events in motion that cannot be stopped.
Tony was playing a dangerous game.
Why would a grown man do something like that?
what do you think you're doing? Come on!
This was a powder keg ready to go off.
Your home wasn't your safe haven anymore. You know, your home is a place where you walk in, you flip off your shoes, and it's just that. It's home. And it didn't feel like that. You know, you just never knew what was going to happen next.
The Davises endure their ugly neighbor dispute for 4 years. But then an unrelated tragedy shatters their world. Jamie, now living on her own, gets a call from Cindy.
I'd heard the most blood-curdling scream from my mother that I'll never forget.
Jamie's brother Jesse has suffered a devastating seizure. He's been prone to them since childhood, but this one sends him to the ER.
It was one of the worst seizures that he ever had in his whole entire life. He ended up in ICU on life support.
9 days later, he dies.
How did we manage as a family to get through the death of Jesse? I don't think you ever get over the death of your child.
The tragedy almost destroys Tony, and his family become the victims of his anguish.
After his son's death, he did go through a spell of having depression and being quick to anger and being agitated.
One incident in particular shows just how deep he's sinking.
There was an argument that ended with Mr. Davis throwing a punch at his daughter.
Dad, are you listening?
After that, Mr. Davis got in a vehicle and drove away. When he returned, his wife, his daughter were out in front. When he was returning, his car jumped the curb and made contact with Mrs. Davis. The car did impact her, but she was not seriously hurt.
How far would Tony's anger spread? Could neighbor Paul Tracy become his next target? According to Paul, Tony goes on a rampage, breaking the Tracys' exterior lights and vandalizing their car.
Mr. Tracy alleged that acid was thrown on his car.
These people are a menace.
Looked more like tree sap, but yet he alleged that this is in fact a concerted effort by the Davises to vandalize their car.
But whenever Paul accuses Tony of a dirty trick, Tony claims it was actually Paul's work.
It was all trivial stuff to anybody, you or me, are looking at it, but to them it was a slight on the other person.
Neighbors remember one incident where Tony may have crossed the line.
Jamie got her car detailed and washed and waxed, and Paul walked over with a water hose and began squirting her car. Weirdo. And Jamie ran in the house and told her dad. When Tony came out, he grabbed his water hose and started squirting Paul. I really felt like Tony was playing a dangerous game, and that, you know, maybe being more passive would have been a better way to go.
The result? Paul Tracy takes the harassment to a whole new level.
What the? Really?
The signs were in placement on Tracy's vehicles. He would have pictures of Awara smoking a cigarette, you know, calling him a fat ass, or, you know, calling him a stinking blob. Anybody and everybody could see.
At that point, Tony had really decided that he was going to stop being passive. Paul could definitely sense that Tony was not going to avoid him and put his head down anymore.
Tony determines the only way to deal with Paul is to catch him on video.
We called a professional to come out and put up a home surveillance system.
Tony installs cameras. Paul puts up more.
Both sides ended up installing video recording equipment. Each one's asserting that their properties or their personal belongings were being vandalized.
But Paul finds a way to disable his neighbor's view.
He got an infrared light that to the naked eye you don't see, but your camera, it still interferes with your camera and just blocks out your screen.
Then he steps up the torment.
One of the things that Mr. Tracy did to get under the skin of the Davis family was to put on a light and then project it toward the Davis property.
You can imagine these huge halogen lights. I mean, other neighbors were complaining about the brightness of these things. So that was a real key escalating point in the ongoing feud.
And he isn't finished. One night, the Davises hear the sound of recorded bird calls blaring from the Tracy's yard. These go on from midnight until 4:30 a.m.
There were different kinds of birds, Tweety birds, mockingbirds, hoo-hoo. And it seems like once you caught on to it, you know, you couldn't ignore it.
And the signs that Paul once put in his car window now appear on the outer wall of the Tracy house.
Those signs were clearly put up for the Davis family to see. There were many signs. Those signs were vulgar, offensive, and obscene.
Aside from being offensive, I thought it was very odd. You know, why would a grown man do something like that? It didn't make any sense to me at the time.
For Tony, this is the last straw. He sees now that his house can never be the home that he and Cindy dreamed of.
My dad just got tired and wanted to move. But unfortunately, the housing market crashed and they were unable to move, so they were stuck.
Tony and I talked several different occasions to sell our home and move on and find some peace. We weren't able to do that at that time.
Forced to stay put, Tony installs his own security lights.
They put the lights up to look at what was going on. And that was the biggest complaint that the Tracys had.
Look how bright these lights are. Get that, honey. Sandy, film it. Come on.
The Tracys come out to confront Tony, and he pushes back,
It's unbelievable.
or so Paul says.
Hey, what the are you doing?
There was an incident perhaps Mr. Davis had using a spray nozzle on his garden hose. He may have come over the top and some of the water had come over.
Hey!
Also alleged was that he was throwing small clumps of dirt and sometimes rock over the property.
Get all this, honey.
You know, both of them, I think, stood their ground and felt that they were wronged. Somehow, they just couldn't resolve the differences that they had between themselves.
Whatever's going on, one of these two men is about to lose control.
The harassment got worse than ever.
I really do think that Mr. Tracy was planning to hurt us.
Drop that weapon!
For exclusive footage, go to investigationdiscovery.com.
Yeah, what the? Really?
I think the Tracys sat around all day trying to figure out how to harass their neighbors and sue their neighbors. And they were mean people, mean, angry people.
The Davises and the Tracys have been feuding for 8 years. Over time, any aggressive behavior Tony may have displayed has dissipated. Doctors determined it stemmed from a treatable condition.
Apparently, they found out that he had a brain abnormality that was subsequently medically corrected, and that did not seem to be an issue again.
But Paul's mood just seems to get darker and darker.
He got worse as time went on. Just one bad thing to another.
The neighborhood on Calypso Lane was pretty well maintained. The one exception was the Tracy home. Most of the rear yard had kind of gone to ground. Apparently that had been lushly landscaped in years past, and there were a number of stray cats.
Tires leaning against the front porch, ice chests and PVC pipings, and it was an eyesore.
We got stupid people working at the city.
Our neighbors' video rants get more and more intense.
City truck, couple of Latino-looking sumbitches in it. Really sad that we have to pay police officers to go eat breakfast on our time. You fat city can drive around in brand new trucks that the city taxes bought for you. This is
Paul Tracy had a complaint with the world. He had a complaint with Washington, he had a complaint with everybody, but that whole problem he had with society just filtered down into one specific area, and that happened to be where he was living and his neighbor.
The harassment got worse than ever. So the last year of this feud was intense.
One morning, Tony is on his way to work when Paul calls out to him. His message is cryptic.
Hey, Davis, I won. Hey, Davis, I won.
He was baffled as to what that could have meant. It was just so eerie.
What?
It had bothered my father, and my mother's just like, don't even worry about it. But I really do think that Mr. Tracy was planning something to try to hurt us.
A week after Paul's ominous statement, Tony and Cindy find out what he meant.
I had fallen asleep on the couch watching some soap operas.
Tony is unable to sleep. And he discovers that Paul is at it again with his infrared light. It's finally too much to take.
Hey, honey. We're gonna go over and have a chat with him, okay? Be back in a minute.
He, at some point, left, telling her that he was going to take care of the problem and deal with Mr. Tracy in terms of asking him to turn it off.
Hindsight, I wish he hadn't gone.
He was very exhausted from the years of harassment from Paul, and Tony just really wanted it all to end.
We see Mr. Davis taking like an electric screwdriver and pulling out some of the boards of the fence line that separate the two properties. And you can see him peering into Mr. Tracy's yard.
Paul is nowhere in sight.
A little time elapses and he puts the boards back and repositions them.
Tony walks onto Paul's property. He finds the power cord for the light and disconnects it. But he doesn't stop there. He decides to confront Paul once and for all. Now, the secret purpose of Paul Tracy's strange fence is finally revealed.
The first thing that came to mind when I saw that was it seemed to really channel pedestrian traffic, what military would call like a fatal funnel or a kill zone.
There is no doubt in my mind that this was really a game of cat and mouse, and Tony did exactly what Paul expected him to do.
Paul! Sandy!
What's going on?
When Mr. Davis entered his property, Mr. Tracy lost it. And when he armed himself, he just was enraged.
Hey, Davis, I won.
Tony is shot in the chest, then again in the back.
I think it was all premeditated. I think he was waiting for his victim, for his prey, and when his prey showed up, he knew what he was going to do. Tony was his prey.
Paul's security cameras are also recording. The shooting happens just outside the camera's range. Cindy hears the gunfire and bolts to the Tracy's yard.
The shotgun was pointed at me, and he said, "Get the away." He kept me from getting to him.
Sandy Tracy now calls the police.
911. We had a prowler on our property. My husband shot him. He shot him? Yes.
Mr. Tracy's in the background of the 911 recording. When there's a lull in the conversation with the 911 operator, Mrs. Tracy sounds furious, and she asks her husband, "What the hell did you do?"
Well, what the hell are you doing?
All I know is somebody's banging on the door.
I don't believe you did that.
Tony's nephew is staying with the Davises and races over to try and save his uncle's life. Nicole Wright hears the screams and also rushes to help.
I immediately began CPR, and I saw blood coming out of Tony's mouth.
Nicole suddenly realizes the killer is watching her, possibly preparing to strike again.
It was horrifying, it was scary. He could have opened that door and he could have shot and killed me. He could have shot and killed all of us.
Police arrive to find a lethal situation. Nicole, Tony's nephew, and the critically wounded Tony are trapped in a kill zone with an unseen shooter inside.
They didn't know who the murderer was, where the murderer was. They didn't know anything. And we grabbed Tony and drug him out to the driveway. And Paul opened the door, peeked his head out, and said, "I'm right here," and turned around and walked inside the house.
Come on outside! Right now! You come inside!
It was chaotic and dangerous circumstances.
It was a traumatizing situation. There was a murderer on the other side of the door. The whole street was blocked with emergency vehicles. The ambulance had arrived and the workers began doing CPR on Tony.
Come on outside! Right now!
The police enter Paul Tracy's house, prepared for anything. What they encounter is a very bizarre world.
Hands up in the air where I can see them!
The shotgun is on the couch. Paul and Sandy are sitting calmly beside it.
Inside the Tracy home was a somewhat chaotic scene. There was a very, very large container full of kitty litter, and there were a number of stray cats. The general atmosphere of the home, it smelled, and it was very unkempt.
Get down on the floor!
Close the door!
While being detained at gunpoint, the biggest concern of the Tracys was the safety of their cats. Even though you have law enforcement personnel pulling a gun on you, you're worried about the cats getting out of the house. Immediately after being detained, he felt the need to speak.
This is the first time I've ever discharged a weapon in anger. I was in the Army.
With these words, Paul Tracy incriminates himself. The police then discover Paul's low-tech surveillance system.
The Tracy video camera was attached to a VCR type of device. Mr. Tracy turned on his recorder to capture Mr. Davis. The security videos showed Mr. Davis near that L-shaped fence, near the extension cord that was providing power to the light. It next captures Mr. Davis walking toward Mr. Tracy's front door and then out of view.
Police find the tape on which the shooting is recorded. They believe Paul was trying to hide it, but ran out of time.
To take it out of there was very suspicious to us. If, in fact, you felt that you had acted appropriately, probably the first thing you would do is tell everyone, you're going to see the whole thing on film here.
I was at my home. I had just fallen asleep, and my husband wakes me up. My mom called, and it was the same exact blood-curdling scream that I heard from when my brother Jesse passed away. And right then and there, I knew my dad was dead.
Tony Davis's dream of living the good life on Calypso Lane comes to a tragic, bloody end.
Beautiful person lost their life, and nothing will ever be the same because of one man's anger.
Paul Tracy was clearly a troubled man with a strange fixation on his neighbor.
This feud was something that was just eating him up every single day. He was obsessed with what they were up to, and he was paranoid that they were infringing on his property.
Hundreds more tapes, photographs, and documents are discovered, tracing the long dispute between Paul and Tony. But investigators find nothing to incriminate Tony in any wrongdoing.
There was no evidence to suggest that Mr. Davis had done anything to Mr. Tracy.
The vandalism, the complaints about the dogs, the harassment, all appear made up. Even the incident at the fence seems a lie.
Get all this, honey.
Mr. Tracy said that he had videotaped this all. The videotape was then given over to the sheriff's department. It had clearly been edited and did not support any of the allegations Mr. Tracy was making against Mr. Davis.
The prosecution argued that the fact Paul shot Tony more than once meant his intent wasn't self-defense, but premeditated murder.
He had to consciously channel additional round into the chamber. He could have stopped after the first round, but actually he chambered that weapon 2 more times.
Even if it was a trespass, even if it was a vandalism, Mr. Tracy had no right to be the judge, jury, and executioner of Mr. Davis. That was Tracy law, was not California law.
Despite 2 tragic losses, Cindy and Jamie carry on. Jamie is becoming a nurse, trying to prevent deaths like those of her brother and father.
Losing my father was the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me. But I will take his honor and I will fight for what I believe in. Just a neighborly dispute isn't worth a man's life.
I was very blessed to have 35 years with him. Most people don't get that in a lifetime, so that'll be enough to last me my lifetime until we meet again. When I think of Tony, I'll remember how he lived and not how he died.
Cindy still...
Not the kind that settles gently over a sleeping city, but the kind that presses down on your chest, thick and unnatural, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Bilbao, winter of 1999. A city wrapped in fog, steel bridges cutting through the Nervion River like scars, the streets damp with a cold that seeps into bone. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, a routine, a life unfolding quietly behind closed doors. And then, just before dawn, something shifted. A call came in. Short. Fragmented. A neighbor reporting a door left ajar. Lights still on. No movement inside. The kind of detail most people ignore until they don't. Police arrived expecting nothing. What they found would refuse to be forgotten. The apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a narrow building, tucked between a bakery and a shuttered convenience store. No signs of forced entry. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. Just stillness. And a smell, faint, metallic, almost hidden beneath the lingering scent of detergent and stale air. Inside, everything looked paused. A cup of coffee on the table, half full, now cold. A chair slightly pulled back, as if someone had just stood up. A coat draped over the back, one sleeve hanging lower than the other. The television flickering silently, casting pale light against the walls. And then in the bedroom, nothing. No body. No blood. No struggle. Just absence. Her name was never meant to become a headline. 32 years old. A translator. Quiet. Reliable. The kind of person neighbors describe with the same words. Polite. Reserved. Kept to herself. No enemies. No known threats. No dramatic past waiting to resurface. She vanished without a sound. At first, it didn't look like a crime. Officers moved through the apartment methodically, noting details, taking photos, checking for anything out of place. But everything felt too normal, too intact, as if whoever or whatever had taken her had done so without disturbing a single thread of her life. And that's what made it wrong, because people don't just disappear like that. Not without leaving something behind. The investigation began quietly. A missing persons report filed, a few interviews, questions asked in low voices behind closed doors. Friends said she had no plans to leave, no recent travel, no sudden changes in behavior. She had gone to work the day before, returned home, spoke briefly to a colleague on the phone around 9:17 p.m. After that, nothing. No calls, no messages, no trace. But then came the first anomaly. A witness. A man who lived across the street, third-floor window facing hers. He claimed he had seen movement late that night. Not unusual. Lights turning on, shadows passing, but something about it stayed with him. He described a silhouette that didn't match her build. Taller. Broader. Standing still for too long near the window. Watching. At the time, it sounded uncertain. Vague. The kind of detail that slips under pressure. Investigators noted it, but didn't act on it immediately. There were no other reports. No sounds of struggle. No evidence to support forced entry. Still it lingered, because the door had been unlocked. And in a city like Bilbao, in 1999, people locked their doors. Days passed, then weeks. Search teams combed the riverbanks, alleys, abandoned buildings. Nothing. Not a single trace. No clothing. No personal belongings. No signs of movement after that night. It was as if she had stepped out of existence. The case began to cool. Files stacked. Leads dried up. Attention shifted elsewhere. New crimes. New victims. New urgency. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the disappearance became a footnote. A quiet line in a growing archive of unsolved cases. A cold case. But cold doesn't mean dead. It means waiting. Years passed. Bilbao changed. The skyline evolved. New buildings rose. Old ones disappeared. The Guggenheim transformed the city into something modern, something vibrant. Tourists arrived. Streets filled with life. But somewhere, buried beneath progress, the memory remained. A missing woman. An open door. A silhouette at the window. And then, more than a decade later, something surfaced. Not a body. Not a confession. A mistake. A routine database update. Old evidence being digitized, reprocessed under new forensic standards. Technology had advanced. Methods refined. What once seemed insignificant could now speak. And something did. A partial fingerprint, lifted from the inside of the apartment door frame, overlooked, dismissed at the time due to poor quality, was reanalyzed, enhanced, matched. Not to anyone in Bilbao. Not to anyone even in Spain. But to a name buried deep in an international system. A man with a history that didn't quite fit the quiet narrative of a missing translator. A man who had never been questioned. Because no one knew he was there. The match wasn't perfect. It never is. But it was close enough to reopen the file. Close enough to disturb the silence that had settled over the case for years. Detectives revisited everything. Old witness statements. Photos. Reports. Details that once seemed irrelevant began to shift under new light. The silhouette. The unlocked door. The untouched apartment. A pattern started to emerge. But patterns don't solve crimes. People do. And the man behind the fingerprint, he had moved on. Changed cities. Changed identities almost. A quiet life. Far removed from Bilbao. No obvious connection to the victim. No shared workplace. No mutual friends. Just a single, almost invisible thread tying him to that night. Investigators began to dig. And the deeper they went, the more unsettling it became. Because the man had a past. Not violent, not on paper, but unstable. Transient. A pattern of appearing in places briefly, then disappearing. Jobs left without notice. Addresses abandoned overnight. No clear reason. No explanation. And in at least 2 other cities, whispers. Unconfirmed reports of disappearances. Never proven. Never connected. Until now. The case that had once been silent was beginning to speak again. But what it was saying didn't bring clarity. It brought something else. Dread. Because if the fingerprint was real, if the match held, then the story wasn't about a random disappearance. It was about someone who knew how to enter a life quietly and leave without a trace. Detectives prepared for an arrest. Carefully. Quietly. No media. No leaks. Just a small team, moving across borders, following a trail that had been invisible for years. They found him living alone. Routine. Predictable. Almost invisible. When they knocked on the door, he didn't run. He didn't resist. He just looked at them, calm, unreadable, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. And in that instant, something shifted again. Because the silence that had defined the case for so long was about to break. The door opens before the second knock lands. No hesitation. No confusion. Just a quiet, deliberate movement, as if the man on the other side has already decided there is no point pretending. He stands there in the dim hallway light, older now, face worn by time, but not by panic. His eyes move from one officer to the next, not searching for escape, not measuring distance, just observing, calculating. For a second, no one speaks. Then the words come, flat, controlled, almost routine. His name. The warrant. The request to step outside. He nods once. No questions. No denial. And that, more than anything, feels wrong. Because innocent people ask why. They protest. They stumble over explanations. They try to fill the silence. This man doesn't. He simply reaches for a jacket, the same slow precision in every movement, as if this moment had been rehearsed years ago. As if the script had already been written, and now it was just time to play the part. Outside, the air is colder than expected. Early morning. A street not yet awake. Curtains drawn. Cars still. The world unaware that something long buried is being pulled back to the surface. He is placed in the back of the vehicle. No resistance. No words. Just that same silence. But this time it's different. This time, it feels like it's hiding something. The interrogation room is smaller than he probably expected. Bare walls. Metal table. A single light overhead. No windows. No distractions. Just space designed to force confrontation with the investigators, with the evidence, with himself. He sits down without being told. Hands folded. Posture straight. Waiting. The detectives take their time. Files are placed on the table, but not opened. A strategy. Let the weight of what's coming settle in. Let the silence stretch, tighten, press inward. Ticking clock. Stillness. Then, finally, Bilbao. 1999. A pause. His eyes don't move. No flicker of recognition. No shift in posture. If he feels anything, it doesn't show. We know you were there. Another pause. Longer this time. We have your fingerprint inside the apartment. That lands. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But something changes just a fraction. A tightening around the jaw. A delay before his next breath. It's small, but it's there. The first crack. He leans back slightly, eyes lowering to the table, as if studying the surface, as if the answer might be written there somewhere between the scratches and the worn metal edges. Then he speaks. And his voice is calm. Too calm. I've never been to Bilbao. The lie doesn't rush out. It arrives carefully. Measured. Built. The kind of lie that's been sitting in the mind for years. Polished. Rehearsed. Waiting for the moment it would be needed. The detectives don't react immediately. They let it sit there. Then one of them slides a photo across the table. The apartment. The doorway. A small red circle marking the exact point where the fingerprint was found. Inside, the detective says quietly. Not outside. Not in the building. Inside her home. A beat. Still nothing. But now, the silence is heavier. Because it's no longer empty. It's filled with pressure. Hours pass. Questions repeat. Details shift. Timelines tighten. Where were you in 1999? Who did you know? Why does your print appear in a place you claim you've never been? He answers everything. Or rather, he responds. There's a difference. His words are clean, controlled, almost sterile. He provides just enough detail to seem cooperative, but never enough to create vulnerability. Every answer feels like it's been filtered, stripped of anything that could be used against him. He doesn't get angry. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't break. And that's the problem, because the evidence says he should. They change tactics. The tone softens. Less accusation, more conversation. They talk about the city, about how much it's changed, about how easy it is to forget things after so many years. Memory fades. Details blur. People make mistakes. Maybe you were there, one detective suggests. Maybe you just don't remember. A trap. An opening. A chance for him to adjust his story without admitting guilt. But he doesn't take it. I would remember, he says. Simple. Firm. Final. So they push harder. They bring up the witness. The silhouette in the window. The figure that didn't match her. Still, nothing. They bring up his past. The cities he moved through. The jobs he left. The gaps. Those long, unexplained absences where no one could say where he had been or what he had been doing. And for the first time, he hesitates. Not long. Just enough. But in an interrogation room, a second can feel like a confession. People move, he says finally. That's not a crime. No. But disappearing is. Then they show him something new. A second file. Thinner. Less complete. Another missing person. Different city. Different year. But the details. Too similar. An apartment. No forced entry. Personal belongings left behind. No body. Just absence. And this time, they don't accuse. They just place the file in front of him. And wait. The silence stretches again. Longer. Tighter. More dangerous. Because now it's not just about Bilbao. It's about a pattern. And patterns are harder to deny. His eyes linger on the file. Not long enough to seem interested. But long enough. Then he pushes it back across the table. I don't know anything about that. The same calm. The same control. But now, there's something underneath. Something thinner. Like the surface is starting to crack. The interrogation ends without a confession. No breakdown. No dramatic revelation. Just fragments. Inconsistencies. Tiny shifts that don't prove anything but don't disappear either. And outside that room, the pressure builds. Because the media has started to catch on. A cold case reopened. An arrest after decades. A city forced to remember something it tried to forget. Headlines spread fast. Speculation spreads faster. Was this man responsible? Was he alone? And the question no one can answer. What really happened that night? Back in Bilbao, the apartment building still stands. Different tenants now. Different lives. But the walls haven't forgotten. People talk. Quietly. Neighbors who remember that winter. The police cars. The unanswered questions. The feeling that something had gone wrong, even if no one could explain how. And now, with the arrest, those old fears return. Stronger. Sharper. Because if he was there, if he walked through that door, then he left with something no one has ever found. Days turn into weeks. Forensics reopens everything. Old evidence is re-examined. Microscopic traces. Fibers. Dust. Anything that might have been missed. Because back in 1999, they weren't looking for him. They didn't know he existed. But now they do. And that changes everything. Except one thing. The body is still missing. No remains. No confirmed crime scene. No definitive proof of what actually happened inside that apartment. Just a fingerprint. A witness who saw a shadow. And a man who refuses to break. And that's where the case begins to shift again. Because without a body, without a confession, without something solid, doubt creeps in. Quiet at first. Then louder. What if it's not enough? What if he walks free? What if the silence wins? In the interrogation room, he sits alone now. No detectives. No questions. Just the same metal table. The same ticking clock. And for the first time since his arrest, he moves. A small shift. His fingers tapping once against the surface. Then still again. As if something inside him is adjusting, recalculating, waiting. Because somewhere, buried beneath years of silence, beneath layers of control and carefully constructed lies, there is a truth. And it hasn't come out yet. But it's getting closer. And when it does, it won't just explain what happened in Bilbao in 1999. It will reveal something far worse. Something that has been hidden for years. Something that was never supposed to be found. The first real break doesn't come from the suspect. It comes from the past. Boxes long sealed, files buried under layers of dust and administrative indifference begin to open again. Evidence that once meant nothing is pulled back into the light, re-examined under sharper eyes, better tools, a different kind of patience. Because this time, they're not looking for anything, they're looking for him. And that changes the way everything is seen. Back in 1999, the apartment was processed as a disappearance. Careful, yes, but limited. No visible violence, no body, no immediate suspect. The assumption had been simple. If there was no clear crime scene, then perhaps there was no crime. Now that assumption is gone. Now, every inch of that space is treated like a lie waiting to be exposed. The door frame where the fingerprint was found becomes the center of attention. Technicians revisit it with methods that didn't exist at the time: chemical treatments, layered imaging, microscopic reconstruction. What once looked like a single partial print begins to reveal something else. Overlap, pressure, movement. Not just a touch, but a grip. As if someone had braced themselves there. Leaned in. Applied force. The angle suggests entry. Or exit. And suddenly the scene shifts. Because this wasn't a casual presence. This was intent. Inside the apartment, the re-examination continues. The coffee cup, still preserved, still catalogued. Once dismissed as irrelevant, just part of an unfinished evening. Now tested again. Not for poison, not for drugs, but for trace DNA. The result comes back incomplete. But not empty. A second profile. Faint. Degraded. Almost erased by time. But there. And not hers. The room tightens around that discovery. Because now, the silence of the apartment is no longer neutral. It's contaminated. Occupied. They reconstruct the timeline again. 9:17 p.m. Last confirmed contact. A brief phone call. Nothing unusual. No distress. No indication that anything was wrong. But phone records tell a different story now. A call attempted just after midnight. Outgoing. Unanswered. Only 3 seconds long. Too short for a conversation. Long enough for a mistake. Or a struggle. The number dialed doesn't belong to family. Not to friends. Not to coworkers. It leads nowhere obvious. A prepaid line. Unregistered. Disconnected years ago. But not before it existed. And that's enough. Investigators trace the number backward, pulling fragments from old telecom archives, piecing together data that was never meant to last this long. It's incomplete. Patchy. But patterns begin to form. The number had been active in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Short calls. Irregular intervals. Always brief. Always one-sided. And then, silence. The same night she vanished. The number disappears too. Like it served its purpose. Like it was never meant to exist beyond that moment. Back in the interrogation room, they bring it to him. Not as an accusation. As a question. Do you recognize this number? He looks at it. Longer than he should. Just a fraction too long. Then shakes his head. No. But the hesitation is there again. Small. Precise. And now, repeated. Patterns aren't just in evidence. They're in behavior. They shift again. Photos this time. Not of the apartment. Of the city. Bilbao, late 90s. Streets. Cafes. Corners frozen in time. They place them in front of him one by one. Watching for recognition, for reaction, for anything that breaks the surface. Nothing. Until. A bridge. Old. Industrial. spanning the river like a steel spine. His eyes stop. Just for a second. But this time, it's not subtle. It's instinct. And instinct doesn't lie. Ever been here? The detective asks quietly. A pause. Then,
No.
But now, the word feels weaker. Because his body already answered. The investigation pushes outward. Beyond the apartment. Beyond the city. Because if he was there, if he moved through Bilbao unseen, then there have to be traces. Places he stayed. People who saw him. Moments where he existed outside that single fingerprint. And slowly they begin to appear. A hostile clerk who remembers a man matching his description. Quiet. Paid in cash. Stayed only 2 nights. Left early in the morning, no goodbye. A waitress who recalls someone sitting alone, watching the street more than his food. Not local. Not quite a tourist either. Just present. Always present. But never connected. Fragments. Individually meaningless. Together. A shadow. And then something sharper. A receipt. Old. Faded. Nearly discarded during an archive cleanup years ago. Found by chance in a box of unrelated documents. A hardware store. Date. 2 days before her disappearance. Items purchased, gloves. A small utility knife. Cleaning supplies. Paid in cash. No name. But the timestamp aligns. The location is within walking distance of her apartment. And the clerk. He remembers something. Not clearly. Not perfectly. But enough. A man, he says. Didn't talk much. Looked like he didn't want to be noticed. That's all. But it's more than nothing. And in a case built on absence, more than nothing is everything. They bring the receipt to the interrogation. Place it next to the photos. Next to the phone records. Next to the growing weight of coincidence that is no longer coincidence. This was you. Not a question. A statement. He doesn't answer immediately. His eyes move across the table, taking in each piece, each detail, each thread that's slowly tightening around him. And for the first time, there's something new. Not fear. Not panic. But irritation. A crack in the control. You're building a story, he says quietly. That doesn't make it true. The detective leans forward. No, he replies. But it makes it real. Outside, the pressure continues to build. The media has turned the case into something bigger now. Not just a reopened file, but a narrative. A mystery unfolding in real time. Every new detail becomes a headline. Every development, a surge of attention. And the community, they're watching. Waiting. Because for years, this was a ghost story. Something half remembered, half forgotten. Now it's alive again. And it's looking for an ending. But inside the investigation, the reality is different. Because even with all of this, there is still no body. No definitive moment of violence. No single piece of evidence that turns suspicion into certainty. Just layers. Pressure. And a man who refuses to give them what they need. So they go deeper. Into his past. Not the surface-level records. Not the official documents. But the gaps. The spaces between. Where things don't quite line up. Where time goes missing. Where people disappear from his life as suddenly as they entered it. And in those gaps, they find something. Not proof, but proximity. In another city, years before Bilbao, a woman reported being followed. Watched. Not attacked. Not harmed. Just observed. Her description of the man. It's close. Not exact. But close enough to raise a question. In yet another place, a landlord recalls a tenant who left abruptly. No notice. No forwarding address. The apartment left behind was clean. Too clean. As if someone had erased themselves from it. No crime. No report. Just a memory. And now that memory matters. The pattern sharpens. Not of violence, but of approach. Observation. Preparation. And then, disappearance. Back in the cell, he sits alone again. The same stillness. The same control. But something has changed. Because now, the world is closing in. Not just from one direction. From all sides. Past. Present. Places he thought were disconnected are beginning to link. Moments he believed were invisible are starting to surface. And even without a confession, the shape of something is forming. Late that night, something unexpected happens. He asks for water. A small request. Routine. But when the guard returns, he's not sitting anymore. He's standing. Near the wall. Looking at nothing. Or maybe at something only he can see. Everything okay? The guard asks. A simple question. No weight. No strategy. Just routine. He turns slowly. And for the first time, there's something in his eyes that wasn't there before. Not fear. Not anger. But something deeper. Something harder to define. Do you think, he says quietly, that people can disappear without leaving anything behind? The guard hesitates. Doesn't answer. Because it's not really a question. It's something else. And in that moment, the case shifts again. Because maybe this isn't just about what happened in that apartment. Maybe it's about how it happened. How someone can enter a life so completely and erase it without a trace. But no matter how perfect the disappearance seems, there's always something left behind. Something small. Something overlooked. Something waiting. And now, they're getting closer to finding it. The next crack doesn't come from the evidence. It comes from time. Because time, for all the ways it erases, also distorts. It blurs edges, softens memories, rearranges sequences until what once felt certain becomes unstable. And when investigators return to old witnesses after decades, they're not just reopening conversations. They're stepping into versions of the past that have been rewritten, reshaped, quietly altered by years of silence. But sometimes, time makes people remember things they tried to forget. They find him again. The man across the street. Older now. Slower. The sharpness in his voice dulled, but not gone. He remembers the night. Of course he does. People say that about many things, but this time it's true. Because some images don't fade. They just wait. At first, his story is the same. The light. The window. The silhouette. But when they press, gently, carefully, letting the pauses stretch, something shifts. There was something else, he says. A hesitation. A line he hadn't crossed before. The detectives don't interrupt. They let it come. I didn't say it before because I wasn't sure. And then it felt too late. His hands move slightly, restless now. I saw him leave. The room tightens. Not metaphorically. Physically. Every movement stops. Every breath slows. Leave, one detective asks, barely above a whisper. He nods. Not through the front. A pause. Through the back stairwell. The service exit. No lights there. Hard to see. But I remember the way he moved. How? Another pause. Longer this time. Like he'd done it before. That changes everything. Because until now, the theory had been entry and exit through the same point. Clean. Direct. Controlled. But this suggests planning. Awareness of the building layout. An understanding of how to move unseen. Which means he didn't just arrive. He studied. They pull the building's original plans. Old blueprints, archived, barely legible in places. The service stairwell is there. Narrow, isolated, leading down to a rear alley that opens into a maze of side streets. No cameras. No witnesses. No clear lines of sight. In 1999, it was a blind spot. Still is. Back in the apartment, investigators return again. Not to the main rooms. To the spaces people overlook. Closets. Corners. Edges. Because if he used the back stairwell, then something inside the apartment might reflect that movement. And in the narrow hallway leading toward the rear exit, they find it. Not immediately. Not obviously. But once seen. Impossible to ignore. A faint mark along the wall. At waist height. Too linear to be accidental. Too subtle to have been noticed before. They test it. Layer by layer. And the result comes back. Trace transfer. Fabric. Dark fibers. Synthetic. Not from her clothing. Not from anything found in the apartment, but consistent with something else. Something external. Something that moved through that space. Close enough to brush the wall. They reconstruct it. Slowly. Carefully. A body moving through the hallway. Carrying weight. Not dragging. Not struggling. But holding. Controlled. Deliberate. And suddenly, the absence in the bedroom feels different. Because maybe she never stayed there. The timeline shifts again. If he entered, subdued her quickly, and exited through the back, then everything happened fast. Too fast for a struggle. Too fast for noise. Too fast for her to react. Which raises a question that hadn't been fully considered before. How? Back to the coffee. Back to the kitchen. Back to that half-finished moment frozen in time. They test the cup again. Not just for DNA. For residue. For compounds that wouldn't have been detectable decades ago. And this time, they find something. Trace elements. Degraded. Barely there. But enough to suggest interference. A substance introduced. Not lethal. Not immediate. But disorienting. Sedative. The room shifts again. Because now, the narrative isn't force. It's control. Planning. Preparation. He didn't break in. He didn't fight. He entered. Waited. Watched. And when the moment came, he acted. They bring it to him. Not all at once. Piece by piece. The stairwell. The fibers. The chemical trace. Each one placed carefully, methodically, building a structure he can no longer ignore. You didn't need to force anything, the detective says quietly. She let you in. A pause. His eyes don't move. You were already there. Silence. You waited. Still nothing. You knew when to act. And then, a shift. Subtle, but real. His fingers press slightly into the table. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to feel. You don't know that, he says. And this time, his voice isn't as steady. They lean in, because that's the closest thing to a crack they've seen. We know more than you think. A risk, a push. And for a moment, it works, because he exhales. Slowly. And his eyes flick, not to the detectives, but to the wall. As if something there has his attention. As if something in his mind has just surfaced. But then, it's gone. The control returns. The stillness settles back in. And the moment passes. Outside, the story grows. The media begins to use new words now. Premeditation. Calculated entry. Possible serial pattern. The narrative is no longer about a disappearance. It's about something colder. Something more precise. And the community. They feel it. Because this isn't random anymore. This is method. Back in the investigation, they follow the stairwell. Not just inside the building. Outside. Into the alley. They map it. Measure distances. Recreate the path. From the rear exit to the nearest street. From the street to possible escape routes. And one detail stands out. A blind corner. Sharp. Hidden. A place where someone could wait. Or where something could be transferred. They search the area again. Years too late. But still, they search. Because sometimes things get missed. Not because they're invisible, but because no one knew to look. And then, another fragment. Not from the alley. From a nearby construction site that existed at the time. Closed now. Rebuilt. Changed. But records remain. Workers. Schedules. Deliveries. And, among them, a gap. A shipment logged, but never accounted for. Equipment listed, but not returned. A vehicle present, but never officially signed out. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it's a question. Back in the cell, he sits differently now. Not tense. Not relaxed. But aware. As if he can feel the investigation moving, even without being told. As if he knows they're getting closer, not to a confession, but to a version of the truth he can't control. Late that night, they review everything again. Every detail. Every shift. Every moment where the case changed direction. And one realization settles in. They've been looking at this as a single event. One night, one victim, one disappearance. But what if it wasn't? Because the planning, the control, the precision, none of it feels spontaneous. None of it feels isolated. It feels practiced, refined, repeated. And if that's true, then Bilbao wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment something went wrong. The question is, what? The mistake isn't obvious at first. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't stand out like a broken window or a dropped weapon. It hides in the kind of detail investigators have seen 1,000 times before and dismissed just as often. Routine, explainable, forgettable. But now, with everything shifting, everything tightening, nothing is routine anymore. It starts with the vehicle. That missing entry from the old construction site logs. A vehicle listed, but never properly signed out. No driver recorded. No return time. Just a line in a report that once meant nothing and now refuses to sit quietly. They dig deeper. The company that operated the site no longer exists. Records are incomplete. Staff have moved on, disappeared into other jobs, other cities, other lives. But some names remain. And one of them remembers. Not clearly, not perfectly, but enough. There was a van, he says. White, old, used for moving materials. But sometimes people borrowed it. Who? A pause. A frown. I don't know. It wasn't official. Just whoever needed it. Anyone stand out? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, there was one guy. Didn't talk much. Didn't work there, not really. Just around sometimes. Helping. Watching. Watching. The word lands harder than expected. Do you remember his face? A shake of the head. No. But I remember his hands. The detectives exchange a glance. His hands. Always covered. Even when it wasn't cold. Gloves. Thin ones. Like he didn't want to touch anything. That detail locks into place with a quiet, unsettling precision. Gloves. The receipt. The absence of usable prints, except the one mistake. The one moment where something slipped. They build the timeline again. But this time, they add movement. The van becomes a path. A way in. A way out. A way to carry something without being seen. And suddenly, the blind corner in the alley isn't just a possibility. It's a transition point. Back in Bilbao, they reconstruct it physically. Same time of night. Same conditions. Low light. Limited visibility. A body carried from the rear stairwell. Turn left. 3 steps. Pause. Then into the shadow, where the van could have been waiting. Engine off. No sound. No witnesses. Just a brief moment where everything aligns perfectly. And then disappears. But perfection doesn't exist. Not completely. There's always something left behind. They go back to the alley. Again. Different approach this time. Not looking for evidence. Looking for memory. Old residents. Former workers. People who might have seen something and never realized it mattered. And eventually, they find one. A woman who lived 2 buildings down in 1999. She remembers the night, not because of the crime, but because of a sound. A door. Heavy. Metal. Closing harder than usual. She had looked out her window. Just briefly. And she saw. A van, she says. Parked where it shouldn't be. Did you see anyone? A pause. Yes. How many? Another pause. Then, just one. The room stills. Are you sure? She nods. I think so. It was quick. But I only remember one person. That detail doesn't fit. Not cleanly. Because if he carried her alone, if everything happened as controlled as it seems, then the strength, the timing, the precision, it becomes something else entirely. Something more deliberate. More practiced. Or something assisted. Back in the interrogation room, they shift again. This time, they don't accuse. They don't present evidence. They tell a story. A reconstruction. Piece by piece. The apartment. The sedative. The hallway. the stairwell, the alley, the van, all of it laid out like a path he can follow. Or correct. We think you had help, one detective says quietly. A risk, a calculated move. Because introducing a second person changes everything. It creates pressure. It creates betrayal. It creates the possibility that someone else could talk. He listens. Still. Focused. And for a moment, it looks like nothing has changed. But then, a reaction. Small. Controlled. But real. His head tilts slightly. Just enough. As if considering something. As if recalculating. And that's when they know. They've hit something. You weren't alone, the detective continues. Someone was waiting. Someone in the van. Silence. But here's the problem, he adds. We're going to find them. Another pause. And when we do, they won't protect you. That lands. Not visibly, but deeper. Because this time, the silence that follows isn't empty. It's active. He exhales. Slow. Measured. Then leans forward slightly. The first real shift in posture since the interrogation began. You're wrong, he says. Quiet. Controlled. But different. How? A simple question. An opening. And for a second, it feels like he might step through it. Like something is about to surface. But then, he stops. Leans back again. The moment closes. It didn't happen like that. A crack. Not a confession. But not a denial either. The detectives don't push. Not yet. Because that sentence. It changes everything. It means he knows. It means he was there. It means the story they're building is close enough to provoke a correction. And in interrogation, correction is the beginning of truth. Outside, the case is no longer just a headline. It's a storm. Speculation spreads faster than facts. Was there more than one suspect? Was this part of something larger? Were there other victims? And the question that begins to echo louder than the rest. If this wasn't the only time, then how many? Back inside the investigation, they follow the new angle. Not just him, but connections. People who intersected with his life, even briefly. Coworkers, neighbors, strangers who might not even remember him, but were close enough to be used. And slowly, a pattern begins to shift. Not of partners, not of accomplices, but of proximity. He doesn't work with people. He uses them. Their spaces, their routines, their blind spots. The construction site, the van, not his. Just available, temporary, disposable, like everything else. Which brings them back to that sentence. It didn't happen like that. If there was no accomplice, then everything becomes more precise, more controlled, more disturbing, because it means he did it alone, planned it alone, executed it alone, and walked away, alone. Back in the cell, he sits again in silence. But this time, it feels different, less like control, more like containment, as if something is pressing against the inside, trying to get out. Hours pass. Then, unexpectedly, he asks to speak again. Not with the lawyer. Not with a different officer. With the same detectives. They bring him in. Same room. Same table. Same light. But now, the atmosphere has shifted. Because this time, he started it. He sits. Looks at them. Longer than before. And then, he speaks. Not fast. Not rushed. But deliberate. Careful. Like someone choosing each word before it leaves his mouth. You're close, he says. A pause. But you're missing something. The detectives don't interrupt. They let it come. Because this is the moment they've been waiting for. What? One of them asks quietly. He looks down at his hands. For the first time, really looks at them. As if seeing them not as tools, but as evidence. And then, he says something that changes the case forever. She wasn't supposed to disappear. The room doesn't react immediately. It can't, because the sentence hangs there, suspended in a way that doesn't feel like language anymore. It feels like impact. Like something just shifted beneath the entire case, quietly but irreversibly. She wasn't supposed to disappear. Not I didn't do it. Not you're wrong. Not even I was there. Something else. Something worse. Because it suggests intention. And failure. The detectives don't move too quickly. They've learned that with him, speed breaks the moment. Pressure makes him retreat. What matters now is space. Silence. Letting the weight of what he just said settle in, expand, force him to fill it. One of them leans forward slightly. What was she supposed to do? A simple question. But it cuts directly into the center of that statement. He doesn't answer right away. His eyes remain on his hands, fingers loosely interlocked, thumbs barely moving against each other. Not nervous. Not exactly. More like focused inward. Replaying. Reconstructing. Choosing. She was supposed to forget, he says finally. The words land softer, but deeper. The detectives exchange a glance. Because that doesn't fit. Not cleanly. Not with what they've built so far. Forget what? The other asks. A pause. Longer this time. And when he looks up, there's something different in his expression. Not fear. Not guilt. But a kind of distance. As if he's no longer in the room. As if he's somewhere else entirely. She saw me, he says. The air tightens. Everything begins to align and unravel at the same time. Where? The detective presses. Another pause. Then, not in her apartment. That changes the direction completely. Because until now, everything pointed inward, to that space, that night, that moment. But this pushes it outward. Before. Earlier. Somewhere else. Start from the beginning, the detective says quietly. And for the first time, he does. It wasn't planned like you think, he begins. Not at first. His voice is steady again. But not controlled in the same way. Less guarded. More linear. Like someone following a memory instead of constructing a defense. I didn't know her. Not before that day. A pause. I saw her by accident. The detectives don't interrupt. They let the narrative build. Because this is where truth hides, not in direct answers, but in the shape of a story. It was late afternoon, he continues. Near the river. She was walking, talking to someone on the phone. I don't remember what she said. Just the way she looked around. A slight shift. She noticed me. There it is. The moment. Small. Insignificant to anyone else. But not to him. She didn't stop. Didn't say anything. Just looked. For a second longer than people usually do. His fingers tightened slightly. Like she was trying to remember something. The detectives feel it now. That subtle, dangerous shift from coincidence to fixation. Why does that matter? One of them asks. He looks at him. Directly. And this time, there's something behind his eyes. Not emotion, but logic. A logic that doesn't belong. Because people don't look like that unless they recognize something. The room goes still again. Because this isn't about her anymore. It's about him. His perception. His interpretation of a moment that may have meant nothing. Or everything. So you followed her, the detective says. A pause. Then, yes. No hesitation. No denial. Just a fact. At first, just to be sure, he continues. To see if she would look again. Another pause. She did. The line tightens. She kept turning slightly. Not obvious, but enough. His voice lowers. She was trying not to be obvious. There's no evidence of that. No report. No witness. But in his mind, it's real. And that's when you decided? The detective asks. No, he says. A shake of the head. Not yet. The tension builds. Because now, it's not just about action. It's about escalation. I followed her to her building, he says. Watched which door she used. Which floor. A breath. I left after that. The detectives exchange another glance. Because that doesn't match the timeline they expected. You didn't go inside? One asks. No. Another pause. I came back later.
Of course he did.
Why? The detective asks quietly. This time, the answer takes longer. Not because he doesn't know, but because it requires something closer to truth. Because if she recognized me, he says slowly, then she would remember.
A beat.
And if she remembered, she could say something. There was nothing to say, the detective replies.
Firm.
Grounded. But it doesn't matter, because that's not how he sees it. You don't know that, he says. Same words as before.
But now.
They mean something different. So, you went back, the detective continues. You entered the apartment. A pause. Then, yes. No resistance. No hesitation.
Just another piece falling into place.
How did you get in? She opened the door. The simplicity of it makes it worse. I knocked, he continues. Told her I was looking for someone. A name. Doesn't matter. A slight shrug. She didn't know them. But she didn't close the door right away. That's all it takes. A second. A hesitation. An opening. I asked for water, he says. She let me in. The detectives don't speak. Because the image is clear now. Too clear. She turned her back, he continues. Went to the kitchen. A pause. And that's when I knew. Knew what? That she didn't remember. Silence. She wasn't acting like someone who recognized me, he says. No hesitation. No fear. A slight tilt of his head. So, I needed to make sure she stayed that way. The room tightens again. Because now, the motive isn't revenge. It isn't anger. It's correction.
Control.
The need to eliminate uncertainty. So you drugged her, the detective says. A pause. Then, yes. The word lands flat. Like everything else. In the water, he adds. It doesn't take much. And then what? The detective asks. Another pause. Longer. He looks down again. At his hands. She sat down, he says. Started to feel it. A breath. Confused. Slower. And you waited. Yes. For what? For her to forget. The logic loops back on itself.
Tight.
Unbreakable. But she didn't, the detective says. A long silence. And then,
no.
The word is different this time. Heavier. She tried to stand, he continues. Asked what was happening. A slight tightening in his voice. She wasn't supposed to do that. The first hint of frustration. Not at himself. At her. So you stopped her, the detective says quietly. He doesn't answer. But he doesn't need to. Because now, the story is moving toward the point where everything changed. She wasn't supposed to disappear, he repeats. Softer now. Almost to himself. The detectives don't interrupt. They don't rush. Because they know, whatever comes next, is the part he hasn't said out loud in over 2 decades. And once it's said, there's no going back. He inhales slowly. Exhales. And for a moment, it feels like the entire case is balanced on that breath. Then, he looks up.
And speaks.
But what he says isn't what they expected. For a moment, the room feels like it's holding itself together by force. Not because of what has been said, but because of what hasn't. He sits there, breathing evenly, eyes fixed somewhere between the detectives and something only he can see. The story has moved forward, piece by piece, step by step, until it has reached the edge of something irreversible. And now, it hesitates. Just for a second. Like even he understands that once this next part leaves his mouth, it won't just change the case. It will define it. What happened next? The detective asks. No pressure. No edge. Just a question. He exhales.
Slow.
Measured. And then, she fell. The words land without impact at first. Too simple. Too clean. But then, they begin to spread. She tried to stand up, he continues. But she couldn't. Her balance was off. She reached for the table, missed. A pause. She hit the edge on the way down. The detectives don't move. Don't interrupt. Because now, they're not just hearing a confession. They're hearing a version of it. Where? One of them asks quietly. He gestures vaguely toward the side of his head.
Here.
The room tightens. Because suddenly, the absence of blood in the apartment doesn't feel like proof of nothing. It feels like something that was managed.
Contained.
There wasn't supposed to be any damage, he says, almost defensively. As soon as she was still, I checked. She was breathing. A pause. But wrong. Wrong how? Another pause. Longer. More uncertain. Shallow. Irregular. Not stable. The language shifts. From control. To observation. So you called for help? The detective asks. A flicker. Brief. Sharp.
No.
Why not? This time, the answer comes faster. Because this part, he's certain about. Because I was there. The logic is immediate. Absolute. If I called, they would ask questions, he continues. They would see me, connect me to her. A slight shake of his head. I couldn't risk that. The detectives don't argue. Because arguing implies shared logic. And there isn't any. So instead, one of them says carefully, you moved her. A pause. Then, yes. The word falls heavier than the others. Because now, the line has been crossed. From accident to decision. She wasn't dead, he says quickly. Not then. A detail. Important to him. Not necessarily to the truth. But you thought she might die, the detective replies. Silence. I didn't know, he says. And for the first time, there's uncertainty.
Real.
Unfiltered. I needed time, he continues, to think, to decide what to do. And the best place to do that was? The van. There it is. The missing piece sliding into place. You carried her out through the back, the detective says. He nods. She was light, he adds. Not as a boast. Not as cruelty. Just a fact. The room doesn't react. But the weight of that sentence lingers. Because it reduces everything. Her life, her presence, her resistance. To something manageable. Transportable. I used the stairwell, he continues. No one there. No noise. A pause. The alley was empty. And the van. Where I left it. Of course. They let him speak. Because now, the story is moving on its own. I put her in the back, he says. Closed the doors. Waited. For what? To see if she would wake up. Another pause. She didn't. The silence that follows is different. Heavier. More final. How long did you wait? The detective asks. I don't know. A shake of his head. Time wasn't clear. That much, at least, feels true. And then, another pause. But this one isn't hesitation. It's distance. I drove. Where? I don't remember. The detectives exchange a look. Because that's the first thing that doesn't fit. Not in the way everything else has. Too vague. Too empty. You don't remember, one of them repeats.
No.
But you remember everything else, the detective presses. The apartment. The stairwell.
The alley.
The van. A pause. So, what happened after you started driving? Nothing. He just looks at them.
Come. Still.
I don't remember, he repeats. The lie sits there.
Clear.
Undeniable. Because people don't forget that part. Not if it happened the way he's describing. Not if it mattered. Did she die in a van? The detective asks. A pause.
Long.
Measured. I don't know. Another lie. Or worse. A refusal. Did you take her somewhere? The other detective asks. Did you bury her? Leave her? Dump her? Silence.
We need to know, he adds.
Not as pressure.
But as fact.
Still nothing. Because this This is the part he's holding on to. The one thing he hasn't given them. The one piece that keeps the case from closing completely. And he knows it. Back in a room, the air shifts again. The momentum stalls. Because, without that final detail, everything else hangs. Incomplete. Unresolved. You said she wasn't supposed to disappear, the detective says slowly. So what changed? A pause. You did, he answers. The detectives don't move. You made her disappear, one of them says. He shakes his head.
Slow.
Deliberate.
No.
And now, for the first time, there's something in his voice that doesn't match the rest. I didn't. The silence that follows is different. Not empty, not tense, but uncertain. Because that answer, it doesn't fit. You carried her out, the detective says. You put her in the van. You drove away.
A beat.
So, if you didn't make her disappear, who did? The question hangs there. Sharp. Unavoidable. And for a moment, it looks like he might answer. Like something is about to surface. But instead, he leans back. The control returns. The distance closes in again. I told you, he says quietly. I don't remember. The interrogation ends there. Not because they're done, but because they've hit the edge. The place where truth stops. And something else begins. Outside, the case explodes. Confession, partial. Details disturbing. But still, no body. No location. No closure. And now, a new question begins to spread. Faster than the last. More dangerous. If he didn't make her disappear, then what did? The confession fractures the case instead of closing it. That's the first thing everyone realizes. Not immediately. At first, there's a surge. Headlines explode. Words like breakthrough, confession, finally flood the media. For a brief moment, it feels like the silence has been defeated, like the long-dead case has finally been dragged into the light and forced to speak. But then, the details settle. And what's left isn't resolution. It's a void. Because he admitted just enough to make the truth visible. And withheld just enough to keep it unreachable. Inside the investigation, the atmosphere changes. Before, they were chasing shadows. Now they're chasing gaps. And gaps are harder. Because they don't give you anything to hold on to. They reconstruct the timeline again. But this time, it's built around his version. The encounter by the river. The decision to follow. The apartment. The sedative. The fall. The van. And then, nothing. A break in the narrative so clean, so abrupt, it doesn't feel like memory loss. It feels like a wall. So they test it. Not emotionally. Not psychologically. Physically. They bring in maps. Old ones. From 1999. Road layouts before Reconstruction. Industrial zones that no longer exist. Access roads that have since been closed or repurposed. Areas where a van could move without being noticed, where someone could stop without drawing attention. They place them in front of him, one by one. Show us where you drove. He looks. For a long time. Longer than before. Longer than someone who doesn't remember should. His eyes move across the map slowly, deliberately, following routes, stopping at intersections, lingering at certain areas. Too long. Then, he shakes his head. I don't know. But the hesitation is there again. Stronger this time. More visible. Because this isn't a random memory. It's spatial. And spatial memory doesn't disappear like that. They push. Not hard. Just enough. You said you needed time, one detective says. You drove somewhere quiet. Somewhere you could stop. A pause. There are only so many places like that, the other adds. Silence. Industrial areas. Construction zones. Riverbanks. And then, a flicker.
Small.
But unmistakable. Riverbanks. It's there for less than a second. But it's enough. They don't react. Not outwardly. But internally. Everything shifts. Because now, the map isn't empty anymore. It has gravity, a direction. Back outside, they focus the search. Not everywhere,
Not randomly.
but along the river, the Nervian,
Dark. Cold.
deep in places, unforgiving. They review old records, dredging operations, construction along the banks, any disruption that might have disturbed or concealed something. And one detail surfaces, not from police records, from city planning archives. In early 2000, just months after her disappearance, a section of the riverbank underwent reinforcement. Concrete barriers installed, soil shifted, heavy machinery used to stabilize the edge. At the time, routine. Now, a possibility. They move in, quietly. No announcements. No media.
Just a team. Scanning. Testing.
Looking for anomalies beneath layers of time and construction. But the river doesn't give anything back easily. Days pass. Then weeks. Nothing definitive. No remains. No objects. No confirmation. Just more silence. Back in the interrogation room, they change approach again. Not evidence. Not logic. Emotion. You said she wasn't supposed to disappear, the detective begins. But she did. A pause. And you were the last person to see her alive. He doesn't respond. That means you're the only one who can end this. Still nothing. Her family is still waiting. A flicker. Barely there, but real. They don't know what happened to her. They don't know where she is. They don't even know if she suffered. His jaw tightens. Just slightly. You do. Silence. And you're choosing not to tell us. The words hang there, heavy,
Direct.
unavoidable. For a moment, it looks like something might shift, like the weight of that truth might finally push him past the point of control. But then, he exhales,
Slow.
measured, and the moment passes. I told you what I remember. The wall again. So they change direction. Not forward. Backward. They go deeper into his past. Not just the gaps. The patterns within them. Because if Bilbao was in the beginning, then there have to be earlier moments. Earlier mistakes. Earlier versions of the same behavior. And eventually, they find something that doesn't fit. A case. Not officially linked. Not even officially open anymore. Different city. Different year. A woman reported an incident. Not a disappearance. Not a crime, exactly. But something close. She claimed someone had entered her apartment while she was home. Not by force. Not violently. But quietly. She woke up on the couch.
Disoriented.
No memory of how she got there. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. Just a sense that something had happened. At the time, it was dismissed. No evidence. No witnesses. No follow-up.
But now,
it feels familiar. Too familiar. They bring it to him. Not as an accusation. As a reflection. This happened before, the detective says quietly. A pause. You've done this before. He looks at the file. Longer than he should. This isn't about Bilbao, the detective continues. This is about a pattern. Silence. You enter. You control. You leave.
A beat.
And this time, something went wrong. The words land. Harder than expected. Because this time, he reacts. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But internally. His breathing shifts. Just slightly. You think this is the first time you lost control? The detective presses. A pause. You think this is the only one that ended like this? And there it is. A break. Not in words, but in presence. For a second, he's not in the room anymore. He's somewhere else. Another place. Another moment. Another version of the same story. Then, he comes back. And the control snaps back into place. No, he says. One word. But loaded. No, this isn't the first time.
Or,
no, you're wrong. They don't know which.
And neither does he.
The interrogation ends again. Incomplete. Unresolved. But outside, the case has changed. It's no longer just about one disappearance. It's about how many, and how many were never found. Because if Bilbao was a mistake, then the others might have been perfect. The investigation stops looking for answers and starts looking for damage. Because by now, the shape of the truth is no longer a single point. It's a pattern stretching backward, faint but undeniable, like footprints that only appear when you stop staring at the ground and start looking at the path. Bilbao was never isolated. It just failed. They reopen everything. Not just cases that look similar, but cases that feel similar. Reports that were dismissed. Incidents that didn't escalate. Complaints that didn't lead anywhere. The kind of things that get filed away under uncertain, inconclusive, no further action required. Because now, those are the ones that matter. And the first connection isn't even a disappearance. It's a memory. A woman, now older, living in a different city, who once reported something she couldn't explain. Years ago, she had come home late, tired, distracted, the routine of her life unfolding exactly as expected. Door locked.
Lights on.
Nothing unusual. Until later. She remembers drinking water. She remembers sitting down. She remembers a feeling. Not fear. Not pain. Just slowing. Like her body wasn't entirely hers anymore. Then nothing. When she woke up, hours had passed. She was in her own home. Nothing missing. Nothing broken. But something changed. At the time, no one believed it was anything more than exhaustion. Stress. Maybe something she ate or drank. There was no evidence, no sign of forced entry, no indication that anyone else had been there. So it became a story she stopped telling. Until now. When investigators show her his photograph, she doesn't react immediately. There's no sudden recognition. No dramatic confirmation. Just a long, quiet stare. And then, I've seen him before. The room tightens. Where, they ask. She shakes her head slowly. I don't know. Not clearly. A pause. But he was watching. Watching. The word echoes. Because it's always the same. Observation. Approach.
Control.
And then, nothing. Unless something goes wrong. They build the map again. But this time, it's not geographical. It's behavioral. He doesn't choose randomly. He selects. Studies. Waits. Finds moments where people are alone but not expecting to be. Safe, but not protected. Familiar, but not secure. And then he enters. Not with force. With presence. That's what makes it invisible. That's what makes it work. Until it doesn't. Back in the interrogation room, they stop asking about Bilbao. They stop asking about the van. They stop asking about the river. Instead, they ask, how many? The question lands differently. Not as an accusation, but as a recognition. Because now they're not trying to prove he did it. They're trying to understand how far it goes. He doesn't answer. How many times did you go inside? One detective asks quietly. Silence. How many times did you watch someone before deciding? Nothing. How many times did they not know you were there? A pause. And then, a shift. His eyes move. Not to the detectives. Not to the table. But somewhere else.
Counting.
It's subtle. Almost invisible. But it's there. And that's when they realize. He knows.
Exactly.
You kept track, the detective says. No response. You remember all of them. Still nothing. But you only lost control once. That lands. Because this time, he reacts. Not visibly. Not fully. But enough. A tightening. A delay. A fracture in the stillness. And suddenly, the case changes again. Because this isn't about randomness. It's about precision. And Bilbao was the only failure. Outside, the pressure becomes something else entirely. The media shifts tone. From mystery to fear. How many victims? Serial intruder? Undetected for years? The questions multiply, faster than answers. And the community, they feel it, because now it's not just about what happened. It's about what almost happened. The idea that someone could enter a home, stand inside it, watch, wait, and leave without a trace. That's what spreads. That's what stays. Back inside the investigation, they return to Bilbao one more time. Not the apartment, not the alley, the river. Because even without confirmation, it's the only place that makes sense. They expand the search. Wider this time.
Deeper.
Using methods that didn't exist before. Scanning beneath layers of sediment. Mapping irregularities. Looking for anything at all, that doesn't belong. And then, they find something. Not a body. Not remains. An object.
Small.
Corroded. Buried deep beneath years of buildup. At first, it doesn't seem important. Just debris.
Lost.
Discarded. Until it's cleaned, examined, and recognized. A piece of jewelry.
Simple.
Unremarkable, but familiar. Because it appears in a photograph. One of the last taken of her. Worn on her wrist. The room shifts. Because now, the river isn't a theory. It's real. They bring it to him, place it on the table, between them. For the first time, he looks at something they found, and doesn't look away. His eyes stay on it.
Locked.
And for a moment, everything else disappears. The room, the detectives, the questions. Just him. And that object. A connection. You recognize it, the detective says quietly. Silence. But you said you don't remember. A pause. And then, something breaks. Not completely. Not dramatically. But enough. His hand moves.
Slowly.
Almost unconsciously. Stops just short of touching it. And then, he says something. So quiet, it almost doesn't register. I left that. The detectives freeze. Because that's not memory. That's admission. You were there, the detective says. A pause. Yes. And you know where she is. Silence. But this time, it's different. Because the wall is cracking. And whatever is behind it is about to come through. The room doesn't move. Not after that. I left that. For words. Quiet. Almost lost in the air between them. But they don't fade. They expand, filling every corner, pressing against every unanswered question that has kept this case alive for decades. Because now, there's no distance left. No separation between him and what happened. The detectives don't rush. They've learned that the closer they get, the more fragile the moment becomes. Push too hard and he retreats. Give him too much space and he rebuilds the wall. So they stay exactly where they are. Balanced. You left it where? One of them asks. His eyes remain fixed on the bracelet. Not as evidence. Not as an object. But as something else. A point in time. In the water, he says. The confirmation lands with a weight that feels almost physical. The river, the detective says. A pause. Then, yes. It's the first time he's aligned with their theory. Not corrected. Not resisted. Aligned. Where, the other detective asks. This time, he doesn't answer immediately. His gaze lifts slowly from the bracelet, drifting, not to the detectives, but past them, as if the room has dissolved, replaced by something only he can see. There was a curve, he says. Not a straight section. The water moved differently. The detectives lean in slightly. Because this is direction. Near the construction site, he continues. Before they changed it. A pause. There was a drop. The edge wasn't stable. Images begin to form. Fragments of a place that no longer exists in the same way. You stopped there, the detective says. A nod. Why that location? Another pause. because it was unfinished. The logic again.
Cold.
Functional. No lights. No barriers. No one watching. The perfect place to make something disappear. What happened when you got there? The detective asks. This time, the silence is longer. He doesn't look away, doesn't retreat, but something inside him slows. I checked her again, he says.
A beat.
She was still breathing. The room tightens, because that changes everything. Again. You're sure? The detective presses. Yes. No hesitation. Then why? I didn't think she would wake up. The sentence cuts across the question.
Clean.
Final. I thought it was already too late. The detectives don't interrupt, because now they're standing at the edge of the truth. And one wrong move, and it disappears again. So you took her out of the van, one of them says quietly. A nod. The ground was uneven, he continues.
Mud.
Loose dirt. His voice shifts again, less controlled, more present. I almost slipped. A detail. Unnecessary, but real. And then the detective asks. A pause. I put her down. Where? Near the edge. The image sharpens.
Too sharp.
And she didn't move? The detective asks. A pause. She made a sound. Everything stops. What kind of sound? The other asks. His eyes close. Just for a second. Not words. A breath. Just something. The silence that follows is different. Heavier. Because now, there's no ambiguity left. She was alive, the detective says. A long pause. Yes. The word lands harder than anything before it. And you still. I didn't know what to do. The interruption is immediate.
Sharpened.
Almost defensive. I couldn't take her back. Why not? They would see. Always the same. The same logic. The same loop. So, you left her there? The detective asks. Silence.
No.
The word is quiet, but it breaks something. What did you do? A pause.
Long.
Heavy. And then, I pushed her. The air in the room collapses. No movement. No sound. Just that sentence. Hanging. Final. Irreversible. The detectives don't speak. Because there's nothing to say. Not yet. She rolled, he continues. Not far. The ground dropped. A breath. Then the water. The image completes itself. Without help. Without detail. Without mercy. And after that? The detective asks. I waited. For what? To see if she came back up. A pause. She didn't. The silence that follows is absolute. Because now, they have it. Not just the sequence. Not just the method. But the moment. The point where everything ended. Or should have. Why didn't you tell us before? The detective asks. A pause. Because you didn't know. The answer is simple. Terrifyingly so. As long as you didn't know, he continues, it wasn't real. The logic again. Twisted.
Contained.
But now you do.
He looks at them. Directly.
For the first time without distance. And now it is. The weight of that settles into the room. Into the case. Into everything that has led to this moment. But something still doesn't fit. Because even with this, even with the confession, even with the location, there's still no body. And without that, the story isn't complete. The river still holds something back. And everyone in that room knows it. Because rivers don't just take. Sometimes, they keep. The search begins before the words fully settle. No announcement. No delay. No time for the story to circulate beyond the walls of that room. The coordinates he described, imperfect, fragmented, tied to a version of the river that no longer exists, are enough to move. Because now, for the first time in decades, there is a place. The Nervian doesn't look the same anymore. It hasn't for years. The reinforced banks, the reshaped edges, the concrete barriers, they've changed its flow, its depth, its memory. What once was unstable, unfinished, exposed is now controlled.
Clean.
Predictable. But beneath that, the past remains. They mark the area based on his description. The curve, the drop, the section near the old construction site. It takes time to align old maps with the present landscape, to reconstruct something that has been physically erased and rebuilt. But eventually, they find it, or at least, the closest version of it that still exists. The team moves in quietly.
Divers. Equipment.
Sensors that scan beneath layers of sediment and debris. Technology that can see what the eye can't, reach what hands can't touch. The river doesn't resist. But it doesn't reveal anything easily either. The first day, nothing. The second, fragments. Metal, stone, objects carried by the current, buried, shifted, forgotten. None of it matters. None of it connects. But they keep going, because now, they're not searching blindly. They're following a confession. On the third day, something changes. A signal, weak at first, then stronger. An anomaly beneath the riverbed. Not large, not obvious, but distinct. The divers go down.
Slow.
Careful, because this isn't just recovery anymore. It's confirmation. Minutes pass, then longer. When they come back up, no one speaks at first, because they don't need to. The look is enough.
They found something.
It's not immediate. Recovery never is. The river has had years, decades, to shift, to cover, to distort. What comes up isn't whole. Not intact. But it's enough. Enough to change everything. Back on land, the silence returns. But it's not the same silence as before. This one is heavier. Final. Forensics takes over. Careful, methodical, respectful. Because now, this isn't just evidence. It's a person. Identification takes time, but not as long as it used to. Technology has changed. Methods have evolved. And some things, they don't disappear completely. When the confirmation comes, it's quiet. No announcement. No spectacle. Just a single conclusion that echoes through everything that came before it. It's her. The case that began with absence ends with presence. Back in the interrogation room, they tell him. Not dramatically. Not with force. Just the truth. We found her. He doesn't react immediately. Then, a blink.
Slow.
Measured. Where, he asks. The question feels wrong, because he already knows. In the river. A pause. Where you said. Silence. And then, something shifts. Not relief, not guilt, but release. Because now, there's nothing left to hold back. You see, he says quietly. The detectives don't respond. I told you, he continues. I didn't make her disappear. The words land differently now. Because technically,
he's right.
He didn't erase her. He just put her somewhere. No one could find her. For years. Outside, the news breaks. Not as speculation. Not as theory.
But as fact.
Cold case solved. Remains recovered. Confession confirmed. The city reacts. Not with celebration. But with something quieter. Heavier. Because closure doesn't feel like people expect it to. The building still stands. The apartment still exists. Different people. Different lives. But the space remembers. Even if no one inside it does. The river flows the same way it always has. Unchanged on the surface.
But now,
everyone knows what it carried. What it kept. What it hid. And the questions don't stop. They just change. How many others? How many times did he get it right? How many people never came back up? Because Bilbao was the one that failed. The one where something went wrong. The one that left just enough behind to be found. Back in the cell, he sits the same way he always has.
Still.
Controlled. Unmoving. But something is different now. Not in what he says, but in what he doesn't need to say anymore. The story is complete. Or at least, this version of it is. Because even with the body, even with the confession, even with every piece finally in place, there's still something left. Not evidence, not detail. Something else. A feeling that this wasn't the beginning. And it wasn't the end.
Just the only time.
The silence broke. Closure doesn't arrive the way people expect. It doesn't come with relief. It doesn't silence the questions. It doesn't restore what was taken. It just replaces one kind of absence with another. The city moves on. It has to. Bilbao has always been a place that rebuilds itself. Steel, glass, water, motion. The river keeps flowing. The streets fill again. People return to routines that were briefly interrupted by headlines, by fear, by the sudden resurfacing of something buried too long. But underneath, something lingers. Because now people know, not just what happened, but how easily it happened. A door opened, a voice trusted, a moment misread. And everything ended. The apartment is occupied again. Different furniture, different voices, different lives layered over the same space where something irreversible unfolded. The walls have been painted, the floors replaced, the traces erased. But not completely. Not really. Because places don't forget. They absorb. They hold. Sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet and the city hum fades into something distant, there's a stillness that doesn't feel natural. A pause in the air, like something waiting to be acknowledged.
No one talks about it, but they feel it.
The river, too, has returned to normal. On the surface. Water moving, reflections breaking and reforming. Light shifting across something that reveals nothing and everything at the same time. People walk along the banks now, unaware, or trying to be unaware, of what was found beneath it. The place has no marker, no sign, no indication that, for years, something rested below, unseen, untouched. But once you know, you can't unknow. Back in the prison, he exists the same way he always has.
Contained.
Quiet. Predictable. The interviews stop. There's no need for them anymore. He gave what was required. Enough to close the case. Enough to confirm the story. Enough to satisfy the system. But not enough to satisfy the truth. Because even now, there are gaps. Not in the sequence. Not in the actions. In the intention. Why her? Why that moment? Why the certainty that a glance meant recognition? Those answers never came. And maybe they never will. Because the way he sees the world, it doesn't align. It doesn't follow logic that others can trace. It doesn't explain itself. It just acts. Investigators revisit the other cases. Of course they do. They have to. The woman who woke up on her couch. The reports of someone watching. The fragments that now feel less like coincidence and more like warnings that were never understood in time. But nothing concrete emerges. No bodies. No direct evidence. No definitive links that turn suspicion into certainty. Just echoes. And echoes aren't enough. So, officially, the case stands alone. Bilbao, 1999.
Solved. Closed.
But unofficially, it stretches. Because patterns don't exist in isolation. And mistakes, they imply repetition. The question remains. Quiet. Persistent. Unanswered. How many times did it work? Back in the courtroom, the trial is brief compared to the years that came before it. The confession. The recovery. The evidence. It all aligns cleanly now. No dramatic twists. No last-minute revelations. Just a slow, steady confirmation of what already feels inevitable. He doesn't react when the sentence is delivered. Not outwardly. No anger. No regret. No visible recognition of what the moment means. Just the same stillness. As if this, too, was expected. As if this, too, had already happened somewhere in his mind long before it became real. Outside, the world continues. Because it always does. New cases. New headlines. New stories that replace old ones. But some stories, they don't leave completely. They settle. In conversations. In caution. In the way people look twice at a stranger now. In the way doors are locked just a little earlier. In the way silence feels different when it lingers too long. And in the memory of a case that refused to disappear. Until it did. Years later, someone walking along the river might stop without knowing why. Look at the water. Watch the current move.
And feel something.
Not fear. Not exactly. Just awareness. That beneath the surface, beneath the movement, beneath everything that looks calm and ordinary, there are things that were once hidden, things that stayed hidden, things that might still be. Because the truth about Bilbao was never just about what was found. It was about what almost wasn't. And the silence, the one that started it all, it never really left. It just learned how to wait. Time doesn't end a case. It just changes the way it lives. Months pass, then years. The headlines fade, replaced by newer stories, louder stories, stories that demand attention in a way this one no longer does. The urgency dissolves. The shock softens. The name of the victim becomes something people recognize, but no longer feel. But beneath that surface, the case doesn't disappear. It settles. In archives. In memory. In the quiet spaces where unfinished things tend to stay. Because even when everything is technically resolved, something still doesn't sit right. Investigators feel it first.
Not all of them.
Not officially, but enough. The report is clean. Too clean. Timeline established. Actions confirmed. Location identified. Remains recovered. Cause inferred. Responsibility assigned. Everything in its place. Everything aligned. Except, it isn't. Because the more they revisit it, not for necessity, but for instinct, the more certain details begin to resist. Not loudly. Not obviously. Just enough. It starts with the river. The reconstruction of that night depends heavily on his memory. The curve. The unstable edge. The unfinished section. All of it matches historical records, but not perfectly. Because when they compare his description to the actual terrain from that period, something is off. Subtle, but present. The drop he described was steeper than what existed. The angle, different. The position relative to the road, slightly misaligned. At first, it's dismissed. Memory distortion.
Time.
Stress. But then, it repeats. Other small details. Distances that don't quite match. Timing that feels compressed. Movements that align emotionally, but not physically. And suddenly, the confession feels less like a record, and more like a version. Not entirely false, but not entirely complete. Back in the files, they revisit the recovery. Not the fact of it, but the specifics. Where exactly she was found. How deep. What condition. And that's where the second fracture appears. The sediment layer suggests something unexpected. She wasn't there the entire time. The buildup around the remains doesn't match a continuous presence since 1999. It suggests disturbance, movement, a shift at some point after the initial deposition. The river didn't just carry her. It moved her. Or something else did. The conclusion isn't clear, but the implication is. What he described may not be exactly what happened. Back in the prison, he's no longer being questioned. Officially, there's no need. The case is closed. But unofficially, curiosity doesn't disappear. One investigator returns, not as part of the case, not as procedure.
Just to ask.
They sit across from each other again. Same room, same distance, same silence that once held everything back. You told us where, the investigator says quietly. A pause. But not exactly how. He doesn't respond. The river moved her, the investigator continues. Or someone did. Still nothing. So, which is it? A long pause. Then, you found her. Not an answer, a deflection. We did, the investigator replies. But not the way you said. A flicker.
Small.
But real. You said you pushed her, the investigator continues. That she went straight into the water.
A beat.
But that's not what the evidence shows. Silence. There was time, he adds, between when she left the apartment and where we found her. The room tightens again, because now, they're not confirming, they're challenging. You stopped somewhere else, the investigator says. No response. Didn't you? A longer pause. And then,
a shift.
Not in posture, not in expression. In presence. Like something behind his eyes is moved, repositioned, adjusted. It doesn't matter, he says. The words land heavier than expected. It matters, the investigator replies. A pause. Not anymore. And there it is. The first time he's dismissed the truth. Not because it's hidden, but because it's irrelevant. To you, the investigator says. Another pause. To anyone, he answers. Silence. Because that answer, it changes the question. This isn't about what happened anymore. It's about what he chooses to reveal. And what he chooses to keep. Back in the records, they look again. Not for confirmation, but for inconsistency. And slowly, a second timeline begins to form. Not replacing the first,
but running alongside it.
One where the river isn't the immediate destination. One where the van doesn't stop at the first opportunity. One where something happens in between. A place. Unknown. Unseen. Unrecorded. A gap. And gaps are where the truth hides best. Outside, the case remains closed. Officially resolved. But inside, it isn't. Because now, there's a new question. Quieter than the first. More dangerous. Not what happened, but what part of it never came out. And that question, it doesn't fade. It waits. Just like everything else did. The second timeline refuses to stay quiet. It doesn't overwrite the first. It doesn't replace the confession, the recovery, the official version that now sits sealed in reports and court records. But it lingers thin, persistent, threading through the edges of everything that was supposed to be final. Because once you see a gap, you can't unsee it. They reconstruct the night again, not to prove him wrong, but to test what he left out. The apartment, the stairwell, the alley, the van, all of it still holds. All of it still fits. But after that, the path begins to split. The drive. In his version, it's immediate.
Direct.
A straight line from the city to the river. A decision made under pressure, executed without delay. But the physical evidence, it doesn't support urgency. There's no sign of rapid disposal. No indication of panic. Instead, there's something slower. Something measured. Because if she had gone into the water exactly when he said she did, the sediment would tell a different story. It doesn't.
So they look at the time between.
The space he refuses to describe. And that's where they find it. Not a place. Not yet. A behavior. They revisit the pattern. Not just Bilbao. Everything around it. The earlier incident. The woman who woke up disoriented. The others who reported being watched, followed, unsettled without knowing why. In all of them, there's a common thread. He doesn't rush. He observes. Waits. Controls. And when something shifts, he adapts. Which means that night, when things went wrong, he wouldn't have panicked. He would have adjusted. That changes the timeline. Because adjustment takes time. And time leaves traces. They go back to the vehicle. The van. Recovered records are limited, but not empty. Maintenance logs. Fuel usage. Approximate mileage from that period. Reconstructed through indirect data, through patterns of use, through small details that were never meant to be significant. And when they map it out, a discrepancy appears. Distance. The van traveled farther that night than a direct route to the river would require. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to suggest a stop. Back in the prison, they try again. Not with confrontation. Not with accusation. With silence. They sit with him. No questions at first. Just presence. Minutes pass. Then longer. And eventually,
he speaks.
"You're still looking," he says. Not a question. A statement. "Yes," the investigator replies. A pause.
Why?
The word is simple, but it carries something deeper. Because to him, the case is finished. To understand, the investigator says. A faint shift. "You already do." "No," the investigator replies. "We understand what you told us."
A beat.
But not what you didn't. Silence. Because now, the conversation isn't about facts. It's about omission. "There was another place," the investigator says quietly. No reaction. "You stopped somewhere before the river." Still nothing. The van didn't go straight there. A pause. "We know that." And then, a flicker. Not denial. Not resistance. Recognition.
"You don't need that," he says.
The answer is immediate. "We do," the investigator replies. Another pause. For what? The question lands differently. Because now, he's not defending. He's questioning the purpose. "For her," the investigator says.
A beat.
"For the truth." Silence. Then, a slow exhale. "There was a place," he says. The room tightens instantly. Not visibly, but completely. "What kind of place?" the investigator asks. A pause. Quiet. "Of course." "Where?" Another pause. Longer this time. He looks away. Not far. Not enough. Describe it. Silence. But this time, it's not resistance. It's selection. "A building," he says. The word lands like impact. Abandoned, or close to it. A breath. No one there. No lights. The image begins to form. "What did you do there?" the investigator asks. A pause. "I waited." For what? To see if she would wake up. Again, the same logic, the same loop. And did she? Silence. Then, yes. The room shifts violently. Because that changes everything. "How long?" the investigator asks. "I don't know." But she woke up. Yes. And then, a pause. She was confused. A breath. She didn't understand where she was. The silence that follows is suffocating. Because now, the timeline is no longer incomplete. It's worse. She was alive, the investigator says. A nod. At that second location. Another nod. "And you still took her to the river." A pause. Yes. The weight of that answer doesn't settle. It spreads. Because this wasn't a mistake anymore. Not after that. "What happened in that building?" the investigator asks. A long silence. The longest yet. And for a moment, it feels like this is where it will stop. Where the truth closes again. Where the gap remains. But then,
he speaks.
And his voice, for the first time, isn't steady. "She looked at me," he says. A pause. Like she knew. The same beginning. The same trigger.
But now.
In a different place. A different moment. And I couldn't be sure. Silence. So, I finished it. The words land without detail. Without explanation. Without anything to soften them. And somehow, that makes them worse. Because now, there is no accident. No uncertainty. No ambiguity. Just decision. The second timeline locks into place. The apartment was the beginning, but not the end. The river, was never the first destination, just the last. And everything in between was chosen.